get that. And it couldn't be just a drugstore, and it couldn't be anything cheap. It had to be a Aramis cologne, and that's always stuck in my mind. And I talked to him about the New Age movement in the back seat. We were both riding in the back seat, and he acted kind of bored about it. And I later said he was talking about it very excitedly. And I've always wondered when they said he's knocking the women over, was it him or was it the Aramis cologne?
Aramis cologne?
Yeah. ARAMIS.
Yeah, well, I've heard of it.
I said, and I think that these people, I don't know where he is on the Bible codes. I haven't paid that much attention to him. That maybe he's.
Oh, he's very tight with Rome. He's very tight with Rome right now.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we don't. He's had.
I think that this particular pope has not been the worst one that's ever been out there.
Well, he doesn't have any power of himself.
No, but he has been. There was some fighting of the New Age movement finally when they finally it came down, and he issued some statements that I would have liked to have seen come from any Protestant minister, but never did. Because the wars I went through just to try to get that word out there.
Yeah.
And I finally had a priest walk up to me and say, how does it feel to be the first Protestant who started a serious in-house Roman Catholic Reformation? And said that it was now required teaching in Rome that the Pope considered that the greatest threat to Christianity, the New Age movement. And there was a long time when I thought they were plunging right into it, and then the Catholic priest who did so much to spread it, Matthew Fox, was excommunicated. I guess it was Cardinal Ratzinger who had a lot to do with that one. And unfortunately, Thomas Berry is still there, and Basil Pennington and Thomas Keating are still there. They're doing their damage and spreading their poison, but a good share of the trouble is gone. At least there was some attempt to clean house and acknowledge that it had infected their system.
Well, have you read Father Malachi Martin's books?
I knew Malachi Martin personally. I met him. He called me. He looked me up. I guess a friend of his in Rochester, New York, had put him onto it, and he said I had put him. He'd gotten started on the New Age movement, looking at my things, and I did read his book, The Windswept House.
And that was the one right before he died, isn't it? That was the last one published?
Yes, in fact, he said he was working on another one, and that one that was really going to cause a lot of discussion, and that book didn't get finished.
Well, I remember reading Keys of This Blood, and that just had an big impression on me.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of I thought Keys of This Blood was kind of an inferior book for Malachi Martin. The first book I read of his was The Decline and Fall of the Roman Church, and that was one of the things that helped me unlock the apostasy and helped me write Hidden Dangers of the Rainbow. And then Keys of the Blood I did not think was his most brilliant work.
Keys of the Blood blew me away, well, because it was when I first getting into this kind of research, and it confirmed things that I'd read elsewhere, that you saw elsewhere. He confirmed the fact that there's a pentagon in the basement of the Vatican, a pentagram. That they were doing rituals.
I used to talk to Malachi Martin, and I used to talk on the phone just like I'm talking to you for hours. He'd call and chat, and I kind of miss him. He was an interesting conversationalist. Sometimes he'd make me so mad, but he was an interesting conversationalist. You'd certainly want him at a dinner party.
Yeah, well, Eric John Phelps has spent a lot of time exposing all of the stuff going on at Rome.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of mischief going on, and Malachi Martin would certainly like to talk about it. And his book, I called him when he wrote The Windswept House, and I said, "Darn you, Malachi!" I said, "That wasn't fiction, was it?" And he said, "Nope." and I said, did you write this to protect the guilty? And he said, "Not to mention my kneecaps." He changed the names to protect his kneecaps as well as the guilty.
Huh. Yeah, well, we know. Do you have any kind of? Does Hans, what is his name? Hans van Kolvenbach?
That name doesn't ring a bell with me right now.
What's
You're
that?
Probably ahead of me on that one.
I'm Hans van Kolvenbach?
No, who's that?
Okay, yeah, because he's the Black Pope behind the scenes.
Oh, okay. Well, you're way ahead of me. But another former Jesuit I knew was. I'd met in my travels because he wrote about the Antichrist and looked me up for my work on the New Age movement.
Well, Pat
Vincent Michelli, he's dead now, and he said they had just been so infested with it, and Malachi Martin and Michelli Vincent Michelli both were terribly, terribly concerned about New Age infiltration of the Jesuit order.
Well, you know, Pat Robertson's a Jesuit.
I wouldn't credit him with being that religious, but anyway, forget the sarcasm. I wouldn't believe that myself personally. What's the evidence?
Oh, the only evidence I have is all the research I did on him back in the 80s, or early 90s, I mean, and the fact that if you run him in the codes, it's very dominant.
Well, my experience with him was he was fighting me tooth and nail on getting the word out on the New Age movement.
Well,
then he said when he was celebrating the International Week of Forgiveness on his program, that's the Lucis Trust holiday. And he was describing it exactly the same terms as the Alice Bailey brochures from Lucis Trust were describing it.
Yeah.
And then he had Jeremy Rifkin's unpublished copy of Entropy, and he could have done more in one day to have exposed the New Age movement on his program than I did in 7 years giving up my law practice, traipsing around the country, and instead of exposing it, he called for the nations of the world to have the courage to make the changes Jeremy Rifkin had called for. And this particular book by Rifkin had the entire ugly agenda, population reduction, forced changes in belief, the whole thing. And Robertson was upholding it. And then that thing on the chip, that was the cake. That was the icing. Yeah, I'd had some icing before that. And then he attacked me up one side and down the other, and then finally he brings out in 1989, he does a program on the New Age movement, and he takes this survey and asks people if they'd ever heard of it, and he said, neither did I until 2 years ago. Well, he claimed that he was hearing from God daily, every day. Now God's going to tell him about somebody's cold in the backseat of a yellow Volkswagen in southern Wyoming, and he's going to be the last person in the whole country he'll tell about the New Age movement. And that was, and then in his book, The New World Order, if that thing didn't actually copy part of my things and then deliver a reverse message that the Jews were behind it rather than the target group that they are. and then to add insult to injury, what he plagiarized from me, he credited to Benjamin Creme. And then, of course, the excuse of his staff was, well, he doesn't really write his own books, that this was a research crew from New York that put it together, and they made that mistake.
Yeah, covering them. Well, I found it amusing that he has, business dealings with gold mines and diamond mines.
Oh, yes.
All over the world.
Liberia and elsewhere.
And it comes up very strong in the codes that he's money laundering for the government.
Well, I don't know if he's certainly money laundering firms. He certainly has had a lot of money stick to his hands for running a ministry.
Yeah, and I put up a few donations on my websites, and PayPal says I'm money laundering and closed me down.
Well, I was watching it a few weeks ago. I hadn't seen it in a while. I used to videotape it every day. And I turned on a few weeks ago, and here they were telling people that if you're down and out, if you lost your job, God will have to, instead of reducing your donations, increase your pledge to us, give more. God will have to honor it under the law of reciprocity. Then he's going to have to return it 4, 6, 8. He's getting people basically telling them to send him their last dollar.
Yeah.
And that's basically my scriptures say that you set aside as the Lord has prospered you.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I've been harping about for months on the way they're fleecing the people. And they did a poll, a survey study on who the people are that are making these beast prophets rich. And it's the people living barely paycheck to paycheck because they buy into the lies.
Well, like
give us your last dime and God's going to bless it. He's going to triple fold it.
And that's an investment. I wouldn't want to be in those shoes when the Lord comes back.
Yeah, but who's the stupid one? The one fleecing him or the one giving him the money? You know?
I think the stupider one is the one that's exploiting them.
You expect
because I think that God does look out for people who were innocent.
Well, the Lord has said he would have removed these people, but his people wanted them. So he didn't. He didn't judge and remove them because his people wanted them. They're funding them. They're filling their churches.
There's going to be the day when he's going to come back and people are going to say, Lord, didn't we prophesy in thy name?
Yeah.
And cast out devils in thy name? Depart from me, ye who work iniquity, I never knew you. Yeah,
but you know what? These people like Robertson and Hinn and Copeland, and they're all Knights of Malta. They're all Masons, 32nd, 33rd degree, if not outright Jesuits. They all have secret society oaths that they've taken to Lucifer.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what they are.
Yeah, I don't know if I wasn't there, if it was just plain old